You know what company was on a roll during the 6th generation? Namco. Tekken, Soul Calibur, Ridge Racer, Ace Combat. Games remembered not only for their spectacular gameplay, but their groundbreaking visual flair. Even outside of their bestsellers, they had a fantastic library that holds up incredibly today. It could be argued that their software lineup is ubiquitous with the PlayStation 2. If you had one of those, you likely played at least one of these. Unless you were like me, and you just played whatever the fuck this is. Katamari Damacy is a unique video game. I'm sure I don't need to point that out to you, just placing it side by side with its contemporaries does that well enough. During a generation renowned for the evolution of spectacle and storytelling, Katamari was a $20 4-hour package about rolling up trash with a big-ass ball. Its music is poppy as hell, the colorful abstract art style jumps out at you. Its concept is something that could never exist in real life, but can be understood just from the B-roll footage you're watching right now. It's the black sheep of Namco's software library, yet came out just as iconic and well remembered as the rest. It's that lightning in a bottle Katamari captured that makes it so disappointing that the series went through the evolution it did. Over the 7 years following the first game's release, the franchise received 5 new installments, quickly delving into a downward trend of worsening public reception. With the loss of the series' creator following the first sequel, it seemed like the original spirit of Katamari was lost. More and more gimmicks and characters and other menial changes were introduced to try to resuscitate the series' charm. It all rolled downhill until they just kind of gave up. Outside of mobile games and a single remaster, it seems like the oversaturation of Katamari killed the franchise. But I think that might not be entirely fair. These sequels at their core are still about the same gameplay that Katamari Damacy is remembered so fondly for today. They span so many different platforms and directions that it's impossible to really judge them without analyzing the ways they changed and packaged the formula. Were these really just cheap imitations or woefully misguided but honest attempts? Out of a desire to answer that question, I went through the single-player content of all of the console games sequentially. 37 hours of high-tension Katamari action later, I think I understood what changed from 2004 to 2011. I'm Zinbuster, the biggest Karikano fan in the world. If you hit a wall fast enough in the Katamari games, objects you've rolled up will break off. It's mostly inconsequential when you're like 20 or 30 centimeters, but when you get big and reckless enough, mistakes can shave off a huge chunk of what you've rolled up. The first Katamari Damacy game was the vision of Kaita Takahashi, an artist working at Namco. Prior to being hired by the company, he attended Musashino Art University pursuing a degree in sculpting. His work was unique, with his pieces doubling as both functional objects like furniture or shelving, and a display of his sense of humor. Stuff like a table that collapsed into a robot, or a garbage can that rocked back and forth on its rounded bottom. After leaving school and joining Namco, he spent a period of time working on various different prototypes that never got off the ground. Not to any fault of his own, but the natural business of game development. His mentality towards his employer was a bit at odds with his surroundings. At his interview, he flat out questioned the company's choice to foray into those high-spectacle 3D games. For me, they looked like they were focused on making 3D polygon games that didn't have any sense of humor. Ridge Racer, Tekken, Time Crisis, Soul Calibur, and the Tales series. I know initially some Tales series were not 3D polygon games, but I was shocked by the fact that Namco made that sort of JRPG. That Namco was so different from my sweet old Namco. Naturally, Takahashi wasn't favored by the higher-ups, but was ultimately brought on board to work anyways. The artist that interviewed him saw his value. He was someone that believed in making video games fun, rather than purely cinematic experiences. Even if that vision came at the belittlement of Ridge Racer. After his period of time working on canned project after canned project, Takahashi reached a crossroads of whether to continue that cycle or try his hand at his own prototype. He chose the latter, pitching the game that would grow into Katamari Damacy. The main inspirations for the project can be traced back to 2 sources. Densen was a cancelled PlayStation 2 game developed internally at Sony Computer Entertainment Japan, and helmed by Kiyoshi Sakai, executive designer on Umihara Kawase. You know, the grapple hook video game. The concept was you played as this girl riding around power lines across these floating islands of suburban neighborhoods. Although it never came to fruition, a display of it at a trade show planted some ideas in Takahashi's head that would be used in Katamari. The details of gameplay were unclear, but the footage of a player sliding around power lines in a town was so cool and charming to me, because I realized that this ordinary world could be changed to an extraordinarily wonderful world by a very small idea. Very sadly, this game was not released after all, but it gave me inspiration. Interestingly, I think there are some parallels between Katamari and Umihara Kawase, both being abstract puzzle games designed around maneuvering with this strange tool, the grapple hook in Umihara Kawase and the Katamari in Katamari. Anyways, the other inspiration was this Japanese schoolyard game called Tamakorogashi, where you push a giant ball into a goal. I don't know, I've never fucking played it. These ideas all clumped into a well-rounded concept. You roll a ball around. Any object you touch sticks to it. You can only pick up objects smaller than your ball, but the ball gets larger and larger as you roll up more. Fun ensues. When Takahashi pitched his game, its appeal was instantly understood. Although Namco wouldn't usually greenlight a project from the company's art department, and presumably by an unexperienced developer, the game got picked up on the condition it be developed alongside their newly opened development school. The students would cut their teeth modeling the endless objects that populate the game world. A couple years and an astronomically low 100 million yen budget later, Katamari rolled out to surprising success. The game became a perpetual bestseller for 9 weeks straight, pushing over 30,000 copies on its first week alone. The good word of mouth even crossed overseas to America, where Takahashi was invited to showcase Katamari at the Game Developers Conference during their annual Experimental Games Workshop, a showing that would prove successful enough to get the game localized and released in the States. I think that success is owed to the accessibility of Katamari's concept. When the game drops you into this empty tutorial world and slaps you with the controls, it just feels natural. Like, the two sticks on the PlayStation 2 controller were likely never envisioned with this gameplay in mind, but the parallel layout serves it perfectly, and the sphere you're pushing around is something that's easy to understand physically. So when you progress to the next screen and get tossed into the first level, it's easy to quickly translate that control scheme into the groove of actual gameplay. And the feeling of the Katamari getting larger makes sense. Maybe it's just me, but I think when you're first able to pick up an object you weren't large enough to pick up before, that's when the appeal clicks into place. There's something satisfying about rolling up entire cities and hearing your speakers blow out with the sounds of people screaming for dear life. It's this weird candy-coated power trip that you can't exactly get anywhere else. Beware any imitators. Katamari is real shit. How the hell are you gonna make another game like this? Shut up. Anyways, yeah, this is a video game through and through. Easy to pick up, difficult to master. Enjoyable by everyone. Also $20 and without guns, so I figure a lot of people bought it for their kids. In Katamari, your player character is the prince, this little guy that's the spawn of the king of the cosmos. The only reason you gotta roll up these Katamaris in the first place are because he decided to go metaphorically drunk driving out of the stars and shatter everything in sight. Him, not exactly being parent of the year, sends you off to do his dirty work for him. Over the short run time of the game, you're spread out between two alternating types of missions, creating a star and creating a constellation. Make a star missions drop you into a random point in the world with a goal size and a time limit, and send you off to try to beat the clock. You're rolling everything of anything here. Matchboxes, flowers, toys, cats, people, donkeys, trains, islands, whatever. The word of the day is progression. Every mission starts you where you last spent the most time rolling, only to allow you to build up to unseen areas on the map with unprecedented sizes. There are only 2 open worlds that you go in between, but the variety of angles you're shown of them keep things fresh. Like, in the tutorial you only roll around inside the house for a bit, but during the first star you get to roll outside and see the lawn for the first time. Next star you're exploring the streets outside of that house, and the star after that you're back inside. But now you get so big that you could get up on the roof if you wanted to. When you do revisit locations you've already seen, the objects scattered around are different, giving each star its own distinct feeling even if you're effectively doing the same thing you were last level. Constellations are still those same locations, but now with some gimmicky condition you've got to meet other than size. Rolling up crabs to make Cancer, crowns to make Corona Borealis, twins to make Gemini, girls to make Virgo. This time, the maps are almost comically overpopulated with whatever object you're searching for, like how almost everything on the Corona Borealis stage is wearing a crown, living or otherwise. The alternation between constellations and stars is cohesive and helps mix things up without forcing in too much unneeded content. If you play them like star, constellation, they can also serve as a way to prepare you for the next star mission. Since you're often dropped in with a larger Katamari, you get a better angle to familiarize yourself with the map before you're really racing against the clock. There are 3 constellations that break the formula I just described. The North Star, not a constellation, but I'm grouping it in with the levels, has a stage where you have to estimate how close your Katamari is to its target size. I don't like this, it's just tedious and stressful. Thankfully, it's just a single stage though, so it doesn't overstay its welcome. Ursa Major and Taurus give you a simple task to roll up the largest bear and cow you can find respectively. This sounds easy enough on paper, but when you realize how difficult it is to not accidentally pick up a bear or cow you didn't see, you can observe how it may be frustrating. In what dimension are there cow traffic cones? The fact that there are presents in this stage is legitimately insane. Like actually legitimately insane. Maybe I'm jumping a bit ahead here, but the later game's addition of a retry button mends a lot of the frustration I have. These bullshit stages are so ingrained in my image of Katamari Damacy, I never want a version without them, though. Also, when I mentioned presents, I was talking about these presents you can find during some missions. Each contain a cosmetic item that the player can wear, like headphones or a scarf, just some cute shit. They can be terrible to acquire, though. They get knocked off you like any other item, and the game doesn't tell you if that happens. So it's not just a challenge of locating the box, but holding onto it also. Katamari crescendos with one grandiose finale, your mission to restore the moon. The goal jumps from reach 30 meters to reach 300 meters. Scored to the fantastic opening theme, you grow your Katamari from not even the size of a kid to far beyond the island you started out on. This has to be one of my favorite end caps to any video game, ever. Seeing the world shrink around you, finding far-off islands larger than anything you've seen before that, you roll up in literal seconds. Hell, one of the best memories I have video gaming is going through this for the first time. It's something special that Katamari feels like it earns after building you up to get larger and larger. When the game ends, it doesn't feel premature. It was a bite-sized experience, but one that was perfectly put together. Following a surprisingly dramatic ending where you roll up all the countries, you can hop back into any stage to try to beat your last score, or on a few select stars, play the game in Eternal Mode. This is where they axe the time limit altogether and just let you roll as much as you want. I think if they really wanted this concept to stick, they could have introduced it for every stage, but for what's here, it's a nice bonus. The only other thing that changes after beating the game are the cousins introduced in every stage. Surrounding the prince is a family tree of bizarre cousins, each with their own distinct personalities. You've got this cousin named Miso, whose head is a cup, a cousin shaped like a tennis ball named Marnie. There are alternate playable characters in this game's multiplayer mode, which I wasn't able to play because I had no one to play it with. In single player, though, these wacky and marketable characters will hide themselves somewhere within the level, being caught when they're eventually rolled up like any other object. Upon capture, they don't really do anything else other than get added into your collection. Here you can view their model, a little description of them, alongside any other item you've rolled up during gameplay. All of the meaningless items you pick up in your Katamari are given weight in this section. Everything has a description, even the islands in the sea that have nothing on them. There's even a tab where you can see the names of a lot of the people and animals you've rolled up. It'd be unfair to completely attribute Katamari's success to its gameplay, when the personality and style oozing out of the game is just as brilliant. The amount of detail put into making the world feel cohesive is unbelievable. The town is laid out like an actual town, with people walking around doing actual things. You see parents and their kids shopping, students playing sports, and couples out by the lake. Even if what's being done doesn't always make sense and is more comedic than anything, like the aforementioned overpopulation of certain items, it's put together well. All of this world, and you just roll it up into your Katamari. There's little spoken dialogue in the game, but what's there is fantastic. The king talks in a distinct way, riding the line of royal and theatrical and completely childish. He constantly berates you for your inability to perform if you give him anything less than perfect. I wouldn't go as far as to say making him like this is some super subversive move that makes the game a clever, underrated, timeless video essay title adjective masterpiece, but it definitely helps the game pop out a little bit more than if he was your typical monarchical archetype. The only other bits of dialogue are from cutscenes you get after each star, framing the events of the game through the lens of a family traveling to see their dad's rocket launch. It's nothing heavy, but it grounds the entire thing, being another reminder that no matter how goofy it is, this world is still defined. As what I guess is probably a limitation of the PlayStation 2's hardware, the graphical style of Katamari is flat and blocky. Juxtaposed with what else was being done at Namco during this time frame, it's surprising to see this title resemble something closer to a PS1 game. But all this plays into their hand by giving it a visual look unlike anything else out at the time. When you're not working with a lot, you have to make sure individual items and locations are unique enough to stand out on their own, which Katamari executes with flying colors. Plus, it keeps the frame rate running at a good pace when you're rolling up a shit ton of items at once. Wow. The power of the emotion engine. I'm not even sure what you want me to say about the soundtrack. Unless you live under a rock, you already know it's one of the all-time greatest OSTs out there. Award-winning shit. Interestingly enough, the Katamari development team recruited artists who had once been popular in Japan but had since fizzled out to perform the almost entirely vocal soundtrack. The theme song and are obviously classics, but the full track list is scattered with gems like and just to name a couple I personally like. The genre umbrella that encompasses this soundtrack is Shibuya-ki, a Japanese indie music movement of the 90s that saw a hodgepodge of different world pop influences mashed together and modernized. I'm not exactly well acquainted with this style, but I can understand the influence on this somehow completely diverse but ultimately coherent vision of the Katamari OST. The sound director for this game, Yu Miyake, would go on to be a series staple for longer than Takahashi himself, being the sound director for a good portion of the titles I'm going to be covering here. During Katamari's development, Takahashi shockingly gave him no direction on what to do with the soundtrack, leading to the game's sound being a result of his own passion. After the runaway worldwide success of the first game, the Namco executives, perhaps the same who had a distaste for Takahashi when he was brought on board to the company, had just one thing on their minds. Hey man, that first Katamari game was pretty sick, right? You think you wanna hook us up with like a sequel to that? Takahashi, naturally not being a fan of the game industry's reliance on sequels, rejected the offer. Namco said, "Suit yourself, dick," and went ahead with their own sequel, a reskin version of the initial game now entirely themed around Christmas time. There's practically zero information about this iteration of the sequel out there, but I have to assume it was a release plan to capitalize on the holiday season a la Christmas Nights. When Takahashi found out about this, he was disgusted, and finally agreed to come back for a sequel to preserve the integrity of his creation. Katamari Damacy 2 dropped as We Love Katamari in 2005, with the series hitting Europe and Australia for the first time the following year. Before I get into discussing this title, I want to quickly go back to why I'm doing this video in the first place. The Katamari series is shockingly long, with each little title breaking off and going in a different direction. They're all about rolling and picking shit up, but the method in which they deliver that gameplay can completely make or break the concept. It's impossible to propose my hypothesis about the series without inserting some of my personal opinions about the games. I hope it'll be clear when what I'm throwing out there is an objective observation or an analysis of my personal experience. I say all of this because while I think my analysis of what makes the first Katamari game great is pretty lukewarm, I have some pretty polarizing feelings about the rest of the series. Not necessarily with this game, but just cumulatively. I think it's better to be forthcoming with that bias. With all of that said, I think We Love Katamari is not only a significant step up from the first game, but is bar none my favorite thing to come out of the entire franchise. In fact, I go as far as to say it's probably one of the greatest PS2 games out there, which is really saying something because the console had that Tom and Jerry Power Stone clone on it. Look it up. The thing you've got to understand is that We Love Katamari is designed to coexist with the first game, rather than being a replacement for that experience. You might be thinking, no shit, that's what a sequel is, dumbass. But when you get into the nitty-gritty of the franchise, you'll understand that it's an important distinction to make. Despite these two games containing the same controls and Katamari rolling gameplay, the way that they're designed almost oppose each other. Katamari Damacy is no frills. It relies on the flow of rolling objects up as the entire draw of gameplay. Even when you're doing the constellations and there are different conditions to meet, they're almost always based around rolling up tons of objects across the same maps. We Love Katamari has like 2 or 3 levels where you roll up objects all of the first game, and then like every other mission is about seeing how far you can just push the concept of rolling a sticky ball around. Suddenly, it's not about how much stuff you can roll up, but how fast you can roll it. Or instead of being graded on your size, you're being graded on the cumulative monetary value of the objects you've collected. Maybe the game will just throw away Katamaris altogether so you can roll a sumo wrestler around eating food to get larger than the opponent. You're rolling up fireflies to make the brightest light, clouds to make the clearest sky, or tinder to ignite the largest campfire. It's gimmicky, yeah, but it works because it doesn't impede on the sanctity of the first game. All of these stages are still designed around the same fundamentals. You roll a ball around. Any object you touch sticks to it. You can only pick up objects smaller than your ball, but the ball gets larger and larger as you roll up more. Fun ensues. At first I thought of this title as like Katamari Master Levels, but when I revisited it for this video I realized it's not even shooting to capture the same feeling as the first game. Katamari Damacy is something that you sit down and play through as a singular experience. We Love Katamari is something you revisit, replaying the same stages to aim for better times and scores. There's a level of arcadey replayability that I think captures Takahashi's admiration for the Namco Classic library better than his first attempt. This is in no small part thanks to the implementation of a retry button when you complete a stage, although if your next time is slower than your previous attempt, it won't default back to it when you create a star. Controls feel way tighter in this installment, like it's really subtle, but you can tell when you try to pull off a dash or turn a tight corner. Those Namco bucks that they're pumping into the franchise now do a lot to tighten up the engine. Rather than in the first game where you played levels in chronological order, only deviating if you decided to play the constellation before the star or vice versa, We Love Katamari gates off levels to what seemed to me as playtime. Theoretically, if you really wanted to just skip a level, I don't see why you couldn't, as the requirement to see the credits is gated behind how many stars you create rather than the specific stages you beat. You're not going to want to skip anything though, as the amount of stars you need to complete your penultimate mission of rolling the sun up is actually pretty steep. You're given more than enough reason to replay stages though, as instead of being placed on the same two maps in different angles, you get to see quite a few new places. The inside of a school, the bottom of a pond, this campsite, a new bustling city, a racetrack. A lot of stages have multiple objectives, usually with the first being about size and the second being about speed. Presents return as an incentive to search everywhere, along with cousins, who are now in stages from the get-go. Rather than just sitting in your collection like an asshole though, you can now swap them out with the prince as your player character. Changing them out has absolutely no impact on gameplay, but it's a nice touch that gives you a much better reason to collect them all. There's a lot more of them now also, like Kinoko the mushroom, and Daisy the cow, and what the, I don't even fucking know. Lucha's the best cousin.
Destiny.
Although I really enjoyed the interconnected world of the first Katamari game, how beautiful all the new stages are here makes up for that being absent. There's such a relaxing atmosphere to this world. Despite how minimal Katamari's art style is, the use of colors and sound here elevates everything to such a peaceful state. The campfire both during the day and late at night, and that ethereal garden are two examples that really stand out, but this applies to pretty much every location you visit. Even the chaotic school stage with its crazy-ass background music, I'll get to that, still gives off a subtle nostalgic feeling. Okay, I'm gonna be talking about something I can't back up here for a second, so bear with me, but I noticed that the color palette in this can often feel more muted than the first installment. There's a slight lighting to everything compared to the first game that makes the visuals feel quieter, like these stages are set either early in the morning or later in the evening. Not every stage obviously, like the racetrack, candy, and snow levels are exempt from this, but a lot of the other places look that way to me. This game looks like fall, while the first Katamari Damacy game looks like summer. This could literally just be the settings on my TV, but I see this reflected in some footage online, so whatever, it goes in the video. There's also a quietness to the overworld area you have. As opposed to all the planets and crazy electronic noises you had in the first game, here you have this adorable flat plane reminiscent of a picture book. There are only the sounds of the birds chirping, the slight tune of your walk, and the calls of any new fans who have shown up. Oh, yeah, right. Instead of being given stars to create at the behest of the king, you travel around rolling the Katamari for fans of Katamari. Yeah, Katamari, as in the real-life video game Katamari Damacy. Through some metatextual Matrix Resurrections tomfoolery, the king has become aware of the runaway success Katamari Damacy has had around the world. To keep that gravy train running, he has the prince and his cousins create new stars to keep the eager fans of the franchise pleased. He still shows up and judges your work after each level though, but mostly just to move away the spotlight from your performance and take credit for your work. Everyone is kind of a fucking dick in this game. You try really hard to roll a good Katamari, well exceeding the target for the stage, and the fan will come out calling your work aggressively mediocre and without intent. It's interesting actually. We Love Katamari almost feels like a result of the team's disgust at giving this game a sequel in the first place. The guy giving you your work, your boss, is taking all the credit for everything you've worked on so hard to do, making you do it all over again for no other reason than to please the fans who barely even know who you are. Every stage usually starts with a short section of dialogue that goes the same way. The king is rambling on, showing general discontent for whatever objective you're about to take on. Then he hears a fan interject with some comment praising how cool and awesome and sexy and etc. he is. He thinks about that for a second, and suddenly is completely down for the objective. Remember that Namco only greenlit Katamari in the first place because it helped to support their game development school. The executives that disliked Takahashi were now begging for a new sequel because suddenly he brought them acclaim and admiration. After Katamari, Namco could say they were the ones who made it, even if those higher-ups had no actual hand in development. To sum it up, your objective in We Love Katamari as a player is to create a sequel to Katamari Damacy, for the people who made Katamari Damacy. Jesus Christ, this is more meta than Moon Remix RPG Adventure. I'm still working on it, okay, like the video will be finished eventually. Maybe I'm reading way too into this, but if this was all intentional, it's a shockingly complex concept for a game like this. It definitely serves as an unnerving premonition of the direction the series would take in the future. Despite that pessimistic appearance, We Love Katamari still has a core of sincerity that outshines the negativity. In the place of the Hoshino family cutscenes you saw in the first game, there are now flashbacks to the king's youth. We see how he was always pushed by his father to be the best, never living up to the high expectations set for him. Early on, the young king finds himself in the final round of a boxing match. Him and another kid going at it for first place. To the chagrin of his father, he gets his ass kicked and comes in second. Obviously, this isn't enough, and to the horror of the king, his father hurls his trophy into the lake. A while after that cutscene, you do a request for the grandfather of a Katamari Damacy fan who wants to see what this here game is all about. Scored to one of the most upbeat and optimistic tracks of the game, the king occasionally interjects in your gameplay not to insult you, but to talk about his memories of the boxing match. He shows genuine vulnerability, nothing like his characterization in the first game. I remember playing this stage for the first time and being taken aback that this game actually tries to develop its world and give it a new kind of depth. Suddenly, Katamari is this story about a kind of generational trauma being passed on down the monarchical family line. Throughout the rest of the cutscenes, you see the king grow up, running away from his abusive home and meeting the queen for the first time. Finding someone he cares about gives him the courage to reconnect with his father and try to make things right. He makes peace with the things in his past, being handed the throne and eventually becoming a father to the prince himself. During the closing stage of the game, the king talks to you again, reflecting on his attitude and the state of his life. He's honest with you and says that he's getting pretty bored of being king and thinks switching things up at this point would be a lot more interesting. For the first time, he's actually cheering you on, not because of your work, but because you're his son and he wants to see you succeed. It's a really sweet moment that's a great narrative cap-end to what the first two games have built. I know you might think it's stupid to do a fucking character analysis for Katamari Damacy, because like obviously this isn't some deep profound message that leaves you reflecting on life. But shit, I think it really deserves to be praised that they took the writing to this extent. The narrative being a pessimistic dunk on the game's own existence, then turned on its head to tell a story of overcoming your past and being a better person is way more than I think anyone expected out of a game about rolling up clumps of trash. It's also way more than later games in the franchise even begin to attempt with the concept. To wrap up everything here, I want to quickly cover the soundtrack. Again, there's nothing I can say about this OST that hasn't already been said. I want to go as far as to say it's better than the first game, but it's definitely some good competition. I think it's worth praising that this isn't a retread of the sounds of before, and that the music here is trying to do its own thing. Something messy and chaotic like wasn't in Katamari Damacy, nor was the slower and or the poppy. It's still music from a Katamari game, but it has its own distinct identity. I want to give a quick shout out to for being one of the best compositions of the entire series, hands down. We get the first alternate version of the series theme here through an excellent swing rendition that I honestly prefer over the original. Also, which is a melody of songs from the first game entirely arranged out of animal sounds. My favorite track is the one that plays in the final level, Blue Orb. The last request you fulfill is to roll up the sun, something that you can only accomplish by rolling up the stars you've created in both the first and second games. Yeah, you can actually import your data from the first game to create a complete night sky. Here you are, up in the stars. A fuzzy nostalgic song playing as you condense everything you've created into a single complete mass. There's a sense of finality to it, and perhaps that's for good reason. After this game, Takahashi would walk away from the franchise to try his hand at new experiences, eventually leaving Namco in 2010 for greener pastures. Greener pastures like designing a playground, which I would have never guessed but totally falls in line with what I understand about him. Namco, on the other hand, wasn't done with Katamari yet. We Love Katamari was a tough act to follow, but even without Takahashi's vision, there was still Namco's strongest soldiers developers backing the IP. So, yeah, what was the move in this new era of Katamari? It was to put the series on a handheld without the only parts of the controller that the games used. Alright, before I get into anything about this game, I want to quickly address something. During the research process of this video, I made sure to play every single title on the original hardware it was developed for, and with the original controller. Except for this one, which ironically might be the game that needed to be experienced on its hardware the most. Listen, I don't have a working PSP around, and even if I did, to my knowledge there isn't any way for me to record footage of my gameplay for the video. And not to get ahead of myself, but I don't really want to play this game twice. So full disclosure, I played this on the PPSSPP emulator with this 8-bit DOE controller, using only the D-pad and buttons in order to accurately simulate the finger pain that me and my Katamari fans must experience on a regular basis. The PSP buttons feel slightly different, but I can't imagine they're too far off from this controller. Katamari is nothing without its control and movement. Its intuitiveness is what makes the concept work so well for so many people. It's not like there isn't a learning curve to it, but the second you move around for the first time, the flow of the controls are instantly understood. As I said before, the PlayStation 2 controller is practically made for this game. Even more abstract actions like dashing and flipping to the other side of the Katamari are still easy enough to grasp. That intuitiveness does not translate to a D-pad and 4-face buttons. It's not like it's impossible, you'll definitely get the controls at some point after playing long enough, but there isn't any point where they feel natural. To balance the movement out, you have to have two ways of turning, the usual one button up and one button down that shifts you significantly faster than before, and a slow turn using the L and R buttons that's intended for normally maneuvering around. Neither are a complete substitute for dual stick controls. Maybe a lot of this is reduced if you play using that weird thumb nub thing that the portable nut has, but obviously I wasn't able to try that out. Sidestepping has almost a full second of delay, which is even a problem with the controls, but an oversight in the game engine. It's actually not as big of a deal as you'd think it would be, but it's definitely got to me while playing. Actually, everything just feels really imprecise and slippery this time around. I had way more of a problem moving up hills and steps than any point in the past, which is a frustratingly common occurrence in the level design of this game. Oh, let's talk about the level design. They want me to talk about the level design. I think it'd be unfair to expect this to live up to the past two games' areas and layouts as a handheld side title, and I'm not going to get up here and act like these stages are terrible or anything. I like some of these a lot, like especially the town map. But it is worth pointing out that this is the most linear Katamari game to date in how its objects and gates are placed. In the previous titles, you'd occasionally see these barriers keeping you from entering a new area until you reached a certain size. It was a nice visual indicator of the next point of progression and allowed levels to fluidly grow larger and larger without risking you rolling off to a place where you couldn't pick up any objects. By the time your size trivialized the open nature of the location you were in, the barrier was open and you can move on. Me and My Katamari uses these gates excessively. Although the barriers still open up when you reach a set size, they might as well open up when you've collected all of the objects in an area. Usually it feels like there's only enough to get you past that number. Not every stage is as guilty of this, but holy shit, that city map is atrocious. Oh, the city map. Yeah, remember that grand finale in the first game where you go to the size of the island itself, rolling it up and then catching other far-off islands and clouds in your Katamari? Well, the oomph of that moment is pretty weak when you're rolling up entire copy-pasted cities not even halfway into the game. And especially when you're playing that same exact stage over and over and over again. Me and My Katamari has one of the most frustrating methods of padding out content that I've ever seen. About 7 stages in, or 1 hour and 40 minutes of game time on my end, a stage linking mechanic is thrown into the mix. When you reach a target size on one map, it'll instantly transport you to a larger one with a new goal size. This starts out with like 2 stages linked together, eventually increasing all the way up to 4. Most of these maps aren't changed in any interesting way, so you just end up going through the same exact stages repeatedly for what feels like ages. These paired up levels are long, and there are so goddamn many of them. This game took nearly as long as We Love Katamari to finish with like a fraction of the content. The sense of progression that made the reach a set size levels work so well in the previous games falls apart when you're constantly teleporting around every single time you hit a good size. And I assume this was a restriction of putting the game on the PSP, but as with the control issues, I don't understand why you put the game on the handheld in the first place when you're compromising everything that made it great. There are good moments like the Volcano Island stages. These are weird gimmicky levels like the ones you had in We Love Katamari, and they break up the pace pretty well. But there are only like 5, and by the time you get into the group of them, they're over. Oh, and I guess it's worth mentioning that this game introduces a points mechanic where you get graded on your performance during the stage, usually around some additional requests like roll up soft objects, but it doesn't really impact gameplay other than offering a quick way to unlock Eternal Mode. If I had to hand it to this game for anything though, it's pretty amazing that they got an authentic iteration of Katamari running on the PSP. Compromises or not, there are moments where everything locks into place and feels just right. I'd even say this looks quite a bit better than the first game at points. There's a sort of day-night weather system that changes up the look and layout of the stages, and I think it turned out really nicely. It isn't enough to mitigate the constant reused stages, but shit, credit where credit's due. It's weird to set this game on a tropical island and not have that reflect in any of the levels though. Oh yeah, the story in this game, if you can call it that, is that the king, queen, and prince take a family vacation out to a tropical getaway, and in the process accidentally destroy the homes of countless local animals, leaving them stranded in the middle of the ocean without a home. It's not really expanded on at all though. I barely registered that there was even a plot at all after the opening cutscene. It's mostly just there to justify the serene tropical overworld and creation of islands as opposed to stars. There's some cute shit with this hub though. You can name it whatever you want and travel to other nearby islands by boat to play the volcano stages or change cousins. We get some more relatives here also. I like Horse Prince and Donut Man. This guy isn't even a Katamari. Can we get this guy out of here? Can we get this guy shot? There really isn't much more I can say about me and My Katamari. I know it's a PlayStation P game and it should be cut a bit of slack when it comes to expectations, but the downgrade is undeniable. There isn't even an original soundtrack, it's just reused music from the first two games. And the music reused isn't even that diverse of a selection. The Funny Animal Sound remix from We Love Katamari starts to get a little less funny when I'm hearing it what feels like every other goddamn level. They did give this game a remix of the series theme though, and good god, they did give this game a remix of the series theme. It's the funk era, let's funk together, Katamari, on the funk. In hindsight, this game feels so out of place with the rest of the series that maybe I shouldn't have even included it here at all. But it would feel wrong to leave it out when I'm going to cover another handheld title later on. Pointing to this title as the exact point Katamari went downhill feels disingenuous, because I doubt it was ever the intention for this to be the true successor to We Love Katamari. Neither was the Katamari Damacy online MMO that I was not able to play for this video because they shut it down in 2012. It looks pretty cool though. That honor would go to Beautiful Katamari, the series' first entry on an HD console. Also the game's first entry on a piece of hardware other than a PlayStation device. Apparently at one point this was planned as a multi-platform across all of the 7th generation, but that fell apart when Namco found out that the Wii was a Wii and the PlayStation 3 was a PlayStation 3. If there's any single moment that's to tell for the experience Beautiful Katamari is, it's the opening story cutscene. The king is out with the queen and the prince, indulging in a casual game of tennis. He decides to show off and execute one of his iconic king power serves. This backfires and sends the tennis ball shooting through the cosmos, ripping a black hole through space. The stars are sucked in instantly, leaving the sky empty once again. That kooky little act of taking something deriving from the previous game and slightly changing up the words is the name of the game in Beautiful Katamari. This is the same old shit that you know and love in the worst way possible. Actually, I wouldn't even go as far as to say it's the same shit because there are tons of things missing. Like, literally any narrative tissue connecting this game at all. And a fleshed out complete soundtrack. And more than 3 hours of content. Yeah, this game is 3 hours. Not to put the carriage before the horse here, but this is not exactly bursting at the seams with content. Well, unless you can cough up some more cash, but we'll get to that. Despite its immediately apparent flaws, there are still quite a few strides made here pushing the series forward. The level design reverts back to a more open-ended structure after Me and My Katamari, using the boost and power the 360 offers to absolutely scatter these stages with items. This is the most ridiculously packed Katamari has ever felt, and I love it. The need for awkward loading times has also been eradicated, meaning everything feels way more fluid. The growth you experience is sold a lot better here when there are no loading screens or, God forbid, entire map changes obstructing your play. I noticed a few instances where this meant objects just popped in when I hit a new size, but it was an extremely rare occurrence. There are a couple new gimmick stages thrown into the mix that I really like. The one about rolling hot or cold items to hit a certain temperature is a neat idea that feels ripped straight out of We Love Katamari. I have nothing bad to say here, it's just pure Katamari fun. The ring stage is also cool even if it's something that would just be in like the first game. It's pretty underwhelming after you were doing all sorts of crazy gimmicky shit in We Love, but I'll take what I can get. Outside of those two levels though, every other base main game stage is a simple size goal with an additional point goal if you feel like doing it. This is good stuff, don't get me wrong. The new locations you have to go around feel fresh, and I welcome the return of an interconnected world. The map is filled with all kinds of new locations that weren't seen before, like an aristocratic mansion, a lush Japanese neighborhood, and all sorts of new islands when you reach the largest sizes. But it isn't different enough to make this feel distinguished from what came before it. I can't lie, I respect trying to stick with the basics. After the loss of the main creative force behind your series, you don't want to immediately rush in and flood it with new ideas and mechanics. But this is just excessive, like this game is fucking boring, dude. A $40 video game that has less content than the $20 PlayStation 2 game predating it by 3 years. You have the design philosophies of the first two games blended together in an attempt to be a satisfying continuation for all Katamari fans. But in the process, all that was accomplished was making the video game equivalent to white bread. Katamari Damacy is all about progression, so we're gonna bring that back in full force. Now you can roll up the entire planet. But oh, we're also gonna bring back the weird fucking gimmicks and concepts of We Love Katamari to continue what that game started. But now they're all on the same huge map because that's what the first game did, even though it means none of the architecture is built to accommodate those gimmicks. It's fine, it's not like architecture was ever a big part of the Katamari games. I don't want to be too much of a hater because I can totally see how someone would like this game, but all the reasons I can see to like it are because of what it owes to its predecessors. This feels like a fancier version of the Christmas Katamari idea actually brought to life. Another thing, that might just be me, is that the movement in Beautiful Katamari feels much lighter than the previous titles. Like, you're not moving any faster. In fact, there were way more points in this game where it felt like you were practically moving at a crawl. But the sense of weight that your Katamari had previously feels absent here. This isn't helped by the fact that the Xbox 360 controller isn't exactly suited for the dash move like the DualShock was. Don't get me wrong, it is completely playable, but alternating the sticks in opposite directions is much harder for my brain to coordinate when the sticks aren't parallel to each other. Insert comment here about how this is just a skill issue, and L, to which I approach your house holding a large bomb in response to. The dash isn't essential to movement unless you're trying to be the best Katamari that there ever was, so whatever, I know this wasn't a factor exactly in the developer's control. Something that was in the developer's control was this game's atrocious frame rate. Okay, I know that games aren't shit out overnight, and are the culmination of thousands of work hours, and it's unreasonable to expect every video game to run flawlessly, and to complain about such incessantly online reduces the art form to a pissing contest over hardware performance. But Jesus, this game really struggles to run, and it's kinda surprising to me. I'm not an expert, so I can't tell you why it plays this way, but if I had to throw out a theory, I noticed a couple of times where this game hit a much higher frame rate than any of the previous or later games hit. Maybe the reason it's chugging so hard is that it's trying to match that high frame rate rather than balancing out at a lower consistent point. I don't really know though. This game is backwards compatible on Xbox One and Series consoles, so there's a chance performance is much better there, but I wasn't able to test it out for this video. Still, the extent at which this game struggles to run doesn't really help it out in its other regards. For a shiny next-generation title in the Katamari franchise, it sure does play a lot worse than what came before it. Visually, I have mixed feelings. If we're talking about fidelity, it does look quite nice. Katamari makes the jump to HD completely intact, and when mixed in with a few updated environments can look really fantastic. I would be extremely concerned if they somehow messed up this one because it really isn't that complicated of an art style and yeah, fuck. But outside of a couple points, everything that's here is yet again just regurgitated aesthetic elements from everything that came before it. I'm sorry to keep comparing it to the other games in the series, but it's extremely hard not to when this game's entire existence is just those games on an HD console. And it's not even the best those games on an HD console game in its series. Why do the prince and the cousins move so slow in the corner? I don't know where to put this part. And I know I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel for comments and criticism, but it's so weird to me that they made the animations look like that. Because, like, I doubt it was a hardware limitation. It had to be deliberate, right? Why would they do it? What was their endgame? Why is there a level in this game filled with Xbox 360s when it has literally no bearing on the level objective in any fashion? You could have so easily done something like roll up as many Xbox 360s as possible, but it's like they're just here for some reason. Rest assured that the music in this game is still fantastic, but that's just par for the course with Katamari. You'd think with everything else I'd be complaining that the soundtrack has a different vibe than what came before it, but I actually appreciate that choice. Yu Miyake didn't do the sound direction on this one, and without him we get some fresh blood composing, and music that I think sounds more outright poppy than before. They switched it up and didn't even do a remix of the main Katamari theme in this game, which I respect the hell out of. To give you an idea, I think a lot of tracks sound kinda like Lonely Rolling Star. Like this one. They've got that goofy core / Kliss core shit down. Actually, you wanna know something messed up? Guess what else the guy who composed this song did? I guess that boss fight was kind of like Katamari if you really think about it. There are still a variety of styles represented here, but I think they hit a nice consistent through line that works with an experience so short. Is a narrative continuation of the lyrics in Lonely Rolling Star, which, although I won't get into here, gives us one of the cleanest songs in the entire series. Like, not only this mix, but the one in Katamari Forever also. Holy shit. Is another great track that's probably in my top 5 for the entire series. Its heavy drumline and electronic sound is something that isn't done anywhere else in the series short of chiptune remixes. I know this is a weird comment, but it's surprising to me that Katamari didn't do like drum and bass and jungle more. It's a kind of sound that I think would really fit into the vibe. Well, it's whatever. There are almost exactly the amount of songs that there are stages, so you only get to hear these songs once. The last level with this game's theme blasting is pretty great. For the first time in the series, you grow seamlessly, only pausing for a moment when you actually become large enough to roll up entire continents. The credits minigame from the first game is now part of the actual level. You can outgrow the size of the planet itself, entering the atmosphere and striding across the cosmos as in We Love Katamari, all racing against the clock to block the black hole dooming the galaxy. I finished the level with like literally 1 second left, one of the most intense and fun game experiences I've had in a while. This is a great moment. It's something that does justify this game's existence despite all of its flaws. It's almost as if the game delivers on the idea Katamari Damacy had but couldn't technically accomplish. And then the game just kinda ends. There's like a single bonus stage where you roll around the king, but I don't think it's very fun, and it's more or less the same as the last stage you had just done. It took me 3 hours and 15 minutes to finish this game, and that was with me redoing stages to try to get better scores. But if you're a real Katamari head, and I mean a true rolling star, you can log onto your Xbox Live account and purchase more stages from the marketplace. Oh wow, what a great deal. You can also purchase the cousins that you unlock in-game very easily. I don't want to be petty, this DLC is only like $7, but all of this should have really been included in the base game, man. I mean, it probably was intended to be because all of this content is on the physical game disc, and you actually need to buy it to get every achievement. They just sliced it off and put it on the store. I don't need to give you some spiel on why this is dumb, so rather than doing that, I'm gonna go through these stages one by one and tell you if they're worth buying. If you're getting this game today, it's for much less than its list price, so the extra cost of 28 gumballs is just more insulting than anything. First up, Mechanical Colony. Roll up a Katamari of 2 meters, collecting as many mechanical items as you can for points. The object layout here is incredibly inspired. It utilizes the space allocated excellently to turn this stock town store into a bustling electronics boutique. If you're one of those people that thinks an image of a girl with a TV on her head is aesthetic just because she's in a Japanese schoolgirl outfit, you're gonna fucking love this shit. Buy it if that sounds cool to you, I guess. Otherwise, it's just another reach this set size stage. Fancy and schmancies. Roll up as many items as you can in a store within a set budget. Frugal living. This level takes precision and time that I don't really have. There's a supermarket map for this stage that's exclusive to DLC, which sucks because it's really good. You're gonna get the most bang for your buck with this stage. Munchie's Manor. Who was fucking naming this shit? Roll up as many calories as possible with your Katamari. It's pretty similar to the Sumo Wrestler stage from We Love, but the object placement in the supermarket is enough to distinguish it. I'd recommend this one alongside Fancy and Schmancy's. Dangerous Colony. Roll up a Katamari of 3,000 kilometers, collecting as many dangerous items as you can for points. Derivative of other stages in the game, but the messed up whale islands are fun, so I like it. Probably not my top recommendation though. Lover's Loom. Roll up Fabric. This one is too short and easy for a DLC stage. The most disappointing one of the bunch. I don't recommend it. The Instituto Exactamundo, are you fucking serious? Levels are the estimated Katamari of whatever size formula, which, as stated before, I'm not a fan of. I wish they weren't gated off as DLC because I don't want to pay for them. I was actually successful in one of these, which was cool though. Hubble Horoscope. Hey, quick editor's note. I like messed up and forgot to capture footage for the Hubble Horoscope level. I'm not able to go capture it anymore, so what you're seeing is not actually footage from the level. My bad. Roll up as many items that describe constellations. Like Dangerous Colony, it's quite derivative of other stages in the base game, but it's ultimately harmless and fun. Also not my top recommendation, but still fine nonetheless. So shit, is it all worth it? More than an extra hour of gameplay. Well, none of them radically improve on the other issues Beautiful Katamari has, other than giving it a bit more substance. But it doesn't feel like any less of a slog. After 2 repetitive titles in a row that match the combined game time of the first 2, I'm starting to feel a bit Katamari on the fatigue. So, if you don't want to feel like me, skip the add-ons. Just buy Katamari Forever because it has all the good DLC stages in it anyways. Forever has to be one of the strangest video games in the Katamari franchise, and one of the weirdest releases I've seen in any series like this altogether. I wasn't even sure if I was going to count it as a mainline console Katamari game, but for some reasons I'll get to, I consider it to fit the criteria to be here. So, what is Katamari Forever? Well, it's a compilation title. Kind of. It's a new Katamari game entirely comprised out of stages from We Love and Beautiful, with a couple from the first game thrown in for good measure. It's Katamari, The Hits, a remixed version of the series' best a la Sonic Mania. Except where that game was released 20 years separated from its source material, this came out less than 2, and the stage objectives and layouts are relatively unchanged from the originals. I don't get what the endgame was with this, honestly. I've heard it proposed that this was released as an apology to PlayStation 3 owners who didn't get a port of Beautiful Katamari. But why not just port that game at this point, rather than make this weird amalgamation? If this was a 360 game, it would make more sense to get Xbox owners those old Katamaris. But PS2 backwards compatibility would be available to most with a PS3 in 2009. So why even bother with something like this? I guess Namco just wanted to put out a new Katamari game or something, I don't know. The reason why I consider this game its own beast is that aesthetically, it wildly differs from its source material. There's a new art style, new characters, new story, new music, all of that shit. And there are some new mechanics implemented that make Katamari Forever very much its own thing as well. So I'm not going to waste much time here talking about any of the stages or maps themselves because I've already said my piece about them. I want to judge this for pretty much everything else. And in that regard, it's actually pretty great. I know that probably sounds hypocritical considering how much I criticize Beautiful Katamari for being derivative, but arguably this game pushes the series into a new direction more than that ever did. Yu Miyake considers it the conclusion of the PlayStation home console trilogy for a reason. For one, there is actually kind of barely a narrative again. At least one that has more moving parts than just the king wrecking shit. It's another bright sunny day in the great cosmos. The prince is practicing jumping, for some reason, maybe to give this game some cohesion with its new gameplay mechanic. The king, not content to let his son have anything, prepares to perform his iconic King Giga Jump into the stars. However, while in midair, he collides with a star, knocking him out cold and erasing his memories. Panicking over their ruler's coma, the prince and his cousins frantically assemble a temporary replacement. I'm still here. I will put you back together. The Robo King takes the place of our usual parental figure for half of Katamari Forever. For the other half, we're entering the mind palace of the comatose king to help him regain lost memories of Katamari rolling past. Compared to We Love, the narrative here is still lacking in depth and falls back on the same established tropes of the last game, but I appreciate the attempt made to add in new elements and justify why any of this would even be happening. There are stakes that aren't the stakes previously staked. Alternating between the Robo King's missions and the King's missions is this game's star and consolation cycle, with Robo King stages serving the size-based goals and the King stages serving the gimmick-based goals. This isn't always consistent though. The Robo King gets a couple of their own gimmick stages for some reason. I think they're folded into the size-based goals because they're all about acquiring the most of something, but it still makes the mission structure this game is going for feel a tad confusing. There's still meat here though, Compared to the 3-hour Beautiful Katamari and the bland Me and My Katamari, there is a shit ton of Katamari to roll. They even throw out 3 bonus stages for each king. The Rebel King gets not only the sick as hell race car stage cut from We Love and the funny whale mission from Beautiful, but an all-new Katamari sprinkler stage. In this one, you use the Katamari to bring greenery back to this drab desert. It's not anything super deep, but it feels great to get a new stage designed with the same creativity rolling up fireflies than a sumo wrestler was. It looks nice also. It meshes with the new art style of this game really well. The king gets 3 Guess the Katamari size stages, thankfully sanctioned off into their own corner, where they belong. Put next to the Rebel King offering, it's frustrating to see 3 spots spent on the same exact thing, especially when there are still great stages that weren't brought over for this title. What are you gonna do, I guess? There's enough content here that it isn't cutting into the overall experience. Katamari Forever handles fantastically, being a massive step up from the series' past issues. The return to the parallel dual sticks on the DualShock 3/6-axis/ I don't know what this controller is called, man, brings the control scheme back to its roots. Moving the Katamari feels like a dream here. It's the peak of how tight Katamari has felt or will ever feel in the future. Harnessing the supercomputing power of the PS Triple, not only are loading screens and stages still eliminated, but it runs that way at more than 10 frames per second. Wow, the power of the Cell processor. Comparing the feel of the stages in Beautiful Katamari on 360 to their conversions here, it's night and day in regards to enjoyability. It's like, if you had access to both a PlayStation 3 and an Xbox 360, why would you even bother playing anything other than Katamari Forever? It makes Beautiful almost completely null from a gameplay experience standpoint. I guess if you're a purist and didn't care for Forever's new mechanics, it would make sense to not make the jump. Mechanic. Segue. Katamari Forever introduces jumping into your arsenal of movement. When I first saw this in the tutorial, my instant thought was that it was an unneeded addition thrown in out of a lack of any meaningful new ideas. But when I started using it, it really started to grow on me. Like, this jump absolutely shoots you into the air and allows you to traverse these levels significantly faster than you were ever able to before. Every single stage now handles differently, and requires new strategies than they did on their debut. I just wish I knew that you didn't have to jump by physically moving your controller up earlier, because that is not responsive enough for the speed of this game. Scattered about, you can find power-ups that automatically stick nearby objects to your Katamari. This is stupid. I'm sure I don't need to tell you that this spits in the face of the original design philosophy that this series was built on. The most positive spin I can put on it is that it does add to the arcade flavor Katamari was inspired by originally, and by that, it's not too offensive in nature. After completing the game and scoring high enough, you can unlock a classic mode that removes the power-ups and jump though. Placed beside to classic mode and eternal mode is the real star of the show here, Katamari Drive. After completing the main game, you're given the opportunity to go through every single stage again with this new playstyle. Rather than the dash being a move you could perform, you're now perpetually moving at that speed. You blast through maps that took a good while to scale before. You aren't offered much time for precision anymore, with your time allocated halved, so the name of the game here is mastering your movement and memorization of how to finish a stage as fast as possible. This game mode is absolutely fantastic, and paired with the jumping, gives Katamari Forever its unique gameplay identity. I cannot believe this game expects me to play the Cowbear stage on Katamari Drive, and without the retry button for some reason. That's something I can't exactly parse the reason for. It's still in the game, but now it's placed after your conversation with the King or Robo King. It doesn't change much of anything, but it makes that mission tend to drag on. At least there's a retry button in the menu. Overall, is Katamari Forever a retread on old content for soulless corporate purposes? Probably, yeah. Does it do good to retread in a way that doesn't waste your time? I'd say so. One thing you'll notice right off the bat playing Katamari Forever is how much the art style differs from the previous titles. The flat, blocky textures of old have been replaced with a soft cell shading, coated with a light sketch texture that gives everything this organic look. Like, maybe all of these blocky models are meant to be papercraft. It's a sharp contrast that took me a while to get used to, but as I progressed through the game, I grew to appreciate the visual identity Forever has. It's not trying to look like a spruced up HD version of the PS2 games, rather it's a new style that takes advantage of the increased fidelity of the PS Triple. It's cool. Don't know why the prince in the corner doesn't follow suit with any of this. Still moves slow like Beautiful Katamari also. Whatever. After unlocking Classic Mode, you can also acquire a classic art style that restores the iconic Katamari flair you know and love. Though the colors on everything here look much darker than they're supposed to, it isn't quite an authentic recreation of how the games looked, even as recent as Beautiful Katamari. It's especially visible when your Katamari is still in view, looking like it's fucking illuminated around the world. You get two other art styles you can go with. Comic Book isn't too different from the normal Forever art style, boasting lighter cell shading and a much warmer color palette. It has this nice relaxing aura to it though, that I think suits Katamari very well. Cool shit. I don't know what I'm supposed to be looking at here, man. This art style is called Wood, but I can't tell exactly what is so wooden about it. There's such an ugly grease sheen to everything that they should have called it plastic. Or grease. The three additional art styles don't feel as fleshed out as maybe they needed to be, but it's a cool feature nonetheless. It adds to the plethora of cool side content that gives Katamari Forever its own place in the franchise. Writing-wise, Forever isn't operating on the same metatextual third eye god level of We Love, while also not falling into the pit of safeness that Beautiful and Me and My stoop to. It's a weird middle balance where there's a level of self-awareness and detail that keeps everything interesting, while never really stepping beyond that point. Something like The King's iconic Giga Jump feels characterized in a more tongue-in-cheek way than the opening cutscene of Beautiful Katamari. Like, rather than following the status quo, it's reveling in it. I can have some appreciation for that, especially with a game meant to be an homage to its rich 5-year history. There are memes in this game also. Like the Robo King says, "This is Katamari," like, "This is Sparta." This game came out in 2009. It's a very 2009 video game. The cutscene format from the first two games returns here, alternating between small bits of the Queen trying her best to wake up her husband and an adaptation of the in-universe Ultraman parody. Both aren't exactly comprehensible or deep, but are fun garnish to everything else. There's just earnest to how Forever conducts itself, spitting in the face of its weird corporate origin. It's a very Katamari thing that I found myself getting as invested into it as I did. Perhaps one of the most contradictory parts of the game is its soundtrack. Yumiake returned as the sound director for this game, bringing out a tracklist comprised of remixed and reworked mixes of songs for the franchise. Despite being inherently derivative, each of these songs have a completely different sound that takes the musical style into a fresh direction. Certain tracks I actually preferred remixed, like the crazy flip of the 8-bit chiptune rendition of, and the crazy synthesizer mix of sexy synthesizer mix. That's how you know you're listening to the good shit. Other songs are really creative iterations that can stand toe-to-toe with their originals. The remix in this game converts the lyrics into English and mashes them up with another very different sounding Katamari joint. Even if I'm more into the original mixes of each song, the fact that they even thought of this is really cool to me. None of this feels like it's nostalgia baiting, it's born out of a genuine love and passion for the music of Katamari Damacy. Maybe it's a bit symbolic that the weird animal sound rendition of the first game's music was converted into this grand, full orchestral performance. I read about the process of recording this track in this Yumiake interview. He chose to have the cover recorded by a high school marching band to capture what he thought was the youth and innocence of the Katamari franchise. High school students have so much going on in their lives. They have crushes, they're studying for exams, they're practicing for band practice, and they're hanging out with friends drinking melon soda. So I think it's okay for them to make small mistakes in their performance. Actually, it's better to make mistakes. They're young and have a lot to learn, but at the same time you could feel that spark of excitement inside them. I thought that concept suited Katamari's world very well. He dragged himself out to a high school in the ass early morning, expecting them to play, how you would expect a high school marching band to play, only to be blown away by this passionate, beautiful performance. I don't know, maybe some of the high schoolers that played Katamari Damacy when they were younger. Even if Katamari Forever is held back by its over-reliance on reused content, it's made by people who had a clear passion for the property. It's just disappointing that that energy couldn't have been spent on something that progressed the series into a new direction. Where the Katamari series stood in 2011 was maybe not the most ideal position. The last 3 installments were comprised of a shoddily put together portable title, a half-baked rushed next-gen game, and one fantastic but disappointingly derivative entry. You can trace a sort of downwards trajectory since We Love, with occasional sparks of inspiration snuffed out by the dominant status quo. So, how are they gonna bring it back home? One last Katamari game to get us to the good old days of 6 or 7 years ago. What nobody knew was that Namco had a trick up their sleeve. Something that would get the blood running, revitalize the vision, and take back the throne. Utilizing the power of the newest video gaming machine, they would be able to bring an innovative ball rolling experience to more people than ever before, stretching the definition of what a Katamari game could be with controls ripped straight out of the future. Yeah, that's right. The next Katamari Damacy game would be for Sony's shining pearl, the PlayStation Vita. It was over before it even fucking started. Touch My Katamari is potentially the most bad in parentheses good game in the entire series. When I first played it for this video, it left a sour taste in my mouth. It had the worst controls and stupidest gimmick at this point in the Katamari franchise, with levels designed with an exact pattern to make my fucking head explode. But between the cracks, I get the sense that there was the same passion here that there was for Forever. Aesthetically, there are some interesting things setting this one far apart from anything else Katamari. And those gimmicks I mentioned feel like they come from a place of really wanting to make the game more fun. So I don't think it would be fair for me to dismiss it. Rather, I want to meet it on its own terms as I tried to do with Forever. The central mechanic of Touch My Katamari revolves around your manipulation of the Katamari's shape. Using either the front or back touchscreens on the PS Vita, you can pull your fingers apart to stretch the Katamari out or pull them back together to stretch it thin. Using this power, you can fit through tight spaces or pick up larger batches of objects. Although, the level design doesn't feel like it was put together with this mechanic in mind. The morphing feels situational and tacked onto already pre-made Katamari Damacy missions trademark. It is an interesting demo of the PS Vita's unique strengths, but that novelty wears off fast. This is all disappointing because I think the morphing has the potential to be a cool mechanic, a la jumping or Katamari Drive. It's just that, by its nature, it needs to be more woven into the game itself than those additions were. It definitely doesn't help that the rest of the control scheme is stretched, haha, far too thin between all of the Vita. Since the thumbsticks on the device can't be clicked down, similarly to Me and My Katamari, turning around is mapped to a new arbitrary stick motion. But instead of the easy-to-remember double inward direction press move, you have to do this dumb rotation motion that requires too much precision and execution for the heat of gameplay. Luckily, if you press your two fingers on the front touchscreen, that'll also get the job done. But that leaves you with necessary moves split across the two thumbsticks, one trigger, a back touchscreen, and a front touchscreen, all on a fairly small device. It's almost comically unintuitive for a series built on a motto of accessibility. This is all nitpicky, I guess. Once I got started, I didn't have much of a problem controlling the game at all. You might have a perfectly fine time understanding how this game handles. But to me, it just isn't as ergonomic as the other Katamaris. Jumping returns, but with the disjointed situational level design, it doesn't make that much of an impact on gameplay. Which is real ironic considering how integrated it felt in Forever with its recycled stage lineup. Touch My Katamari suffers from the same problem that Me and My Katamari did, where any open-endedness is discarded for a simple stroll from point A to point B. It feels like you're dished out the exact number of items you need to continue in any given block of the map, erasing any serotonin scraped from dumb shit like the agency of the player. The items in zany situations scattering the missions also feel bland, more a cut from the first Katamari Damacy rather than its preceding games. When I criticized Me and My Katamari for these issues, it was done with the appreciation for fitting it all onto a PlayStation P. They wanted to make a Katamari game for it, and by God, they did. But the PS Vita absolutely could run a more authentic experience. They got the PlayStation All-Stars on that shit. They got Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. They got Metal Gear Solid 3. Oh, I'm sorry, bad example. Point is that the flaws of the game are, from my discernment, less of a result of underpowered hardware and more a result of a low budget or tight time restrictions. Even after the game formatted around reusing stages, they're still reusing stages for padding. On the bright side, a comical effect of the sparse object placement are the absolutely insane difficulty spikes you get occasionally. Like, a few missions will be nothing to clear, and then comes along a make a star mission where it takes a significant amount of work to hit the goal size, more than seconds before the timer runs out. This is the only Katamari game that I had any trouble getting through, although it wasn't completely impossible. Something bad at video games? Maybe these hell levels will be easier for you to clear, I don't know. Megastar 7 was the worst of these by far. The time limit is too short, you start out too small, everything is so far apart and laid out perfectly, so you're constantly hitting items way too big for you. The slog through it felt like some sick Katamari mind torture experiment after breezing through everything else no problem. Something separating Touch My Katamari from the other installments in the series is its rejection of certain Katamari norms and the introduction of dumb gimmicks to modify others. Like, for some reason, now you can only find the cousins and presents in stages after completing them for the first time, meaning you have to beat every mission at least twice if you want to collect all of them. Seeing how short this game is, even with repeat playthroughs, I can understand why they did this, but it's fucking annoying. Returning from We Love are levels being tasks that you complete for fans, but where that game didn't do anything with the concept outside of narrative set dressing, Touch My Katamari uses it to give us the very awesome, very cool candies mechanic. Okay, to simplify this surprisingly nuanced system, candies are currency you earn as tips from completing fan requests. The better the performance, the more candy you'll receive. Also, sometimes the king will graciously give you a candy ticket, which will multiply your total candies for a stage. In between gameplay, you can dump your stash of candies into multiple different shops, offering fashionable clothing for the king, new music to listen to, or the unlocks for the Eternal and Katamari Drive modes. It feels as if these features were gated off as a justification for the candies to exist, which itself feels like a cheap excuse for innovation. And again, it pads out that runtime quite a bit, since if you want to reach full completion, you're going to be grinding for candies. If you want to further extend your playtime with some extra stages, you can try to collect fan Damacies to get download requests. These are these red heart, I don't know what the fuck these guys are, that will randomly show up, being able to be rolled up and collected as another in-game currency. Farm enough of them, and you can get a shiny new stage. Or you can buy fan Damacies as microtransactions. I didn't play the DLC stages this time around, mostly because the grind of collecting fan Damacies just doesn't seem fun, and it's not essential, and I'm not going to commit to getting just one DLC stage and not all of them. I guess I could buy my way to them, but I'm afraid that connecting to the PlayStation Store servers would reflect poorly on my not actually paying for this video game. As I said before, getting off levels in a single-player game such as this from launch is a bad practice that was too prevalent during this era of video gaming. It doesn't belong in any series, let alone Katamari Damacy. Maybe the most confusing missing feature is the traditional collection of old. Instead of being able to view every item you've collected, you can look at a select number of them as curios. I'm not against the treasure hunt of searching for specific items in a Katamari level. I think this mechanic would fit into the mold quite well. But it shouldn't stand in the place of the already established collection that brought so much personality to the series. It's especially disappointing because the unique visual style of this game is its strongest quality. You've probably noticed that things look a bit off from the B-roll footage I've been playing so far. For the first time in Katamari's existence, we've seen a strong aesthetic deviation from what the first game set down back in 2004. Things look softer and stranger than they did before. The prince's round head is actually round now. The cutscenes and 2D artwork are splotchy and cartoony in a much more abstract way than we've seen. Some of it is, dare I say it, anime-esque. But like what anime-esque would look like after taking 20 Benadryl. The king fucking looks like this now, I guess. Oh my goodness gracious. If you've been around the block, this art probably looks pretty familiar to you. It's the work of Akbu, a Japanese art group known for this ridiculously over-the-top look. You've probably seen their work in the video game world before if you're a Grasshopper Manufacture fan. They did cutscenes for both No More Heroes 3 and the fairly obscure PlayStation 3 title Rankosuki Gime's Longest Day. Outside of that world, they've done some pretty iconic music videos such as Japanese hip-hop masterpiece Galo Sengen, and anime work on series like Pop Team Epic. I'm not sure exactly in what capacity Akbu worked on this. The art director of Touch My Katamari is Makoto Ando, who in my research seems to be a now former member of the team. Regardless, the art in this game picks up the slack for the poor gameplay, elevating it into a legitimately worthwhile installment of the franchise. You can tell they had a lot of fun working with the already existing designs and assets, tweaking them into something entirely unique to this title. Like, Velvet has tits now. For some reason. Oh my goodness gracious. The cutscenes between stages return to a more human format, telling the story of a young slacker Katamari fan inspired to improve his life by seeing the king's fall from grace. Oh yeah, the king sucks shit in this game. He's completely washed up, only being a shell of what he once was. After overhearing a mom tell her kid that the king and his principal are, like, the same, he decides to go on a huge PR run and do a bunch of requests for people to return to his former glory. The story isn't anything to write home about, but both the Goro the Slacker cutscenes and interactions with the king have a drop of more personality than we've seen in quite a while. There's also a dub again. You know, this kid sounds pretty familiar. I can't exactly place him though. It's worth throwing out there that this game also looks great on the Vita. I played on the hardware revision that lacks the OLED display, but even without it, everything looks incredibly crisp and vivid. Because of the method I use to capture footage, there's a layer of compression on what you're seeing, but trust me that the game still looks fantastic. It's also worth mentioning that the music in this game, albeit partially kept behind the candies mechanic and additional DLC, is still immaculate. We get another title theme that isn't a remix of Katamari on the Rocks, instead being a bombastic stage performance. A lot of the rearrangements of already pre-existing tracks feel tasteful and fun, like a jazzy rendition of Lonely Rolling Star or the secret peek at the Katamari Damacy soundtrack tier list is good also, whatever the hell is going on in that song. There's a nice energy to the soundtrack that's unfortunately masked by the short overall runtime of the game. Considering how I doubt most of you watching this have a Vita in your possession, I recommend looking up the soundtrack on youtube.com or acquiring it via other legal means. It's by far the most underrated set of songs in the whole series, and it's unfortunate that both the music and visuals of this game went mostly ignored because of the poor gameplay performance. There's a level of passion in Touch My Katamari that I find admirable. I think the development team had the vision for the series, but probably weren't given the resources or had the experience to fully realize it. With both the failure of the PlayStation Vita and the decay of the franchise, this game has been left to rot away with the worst overall reception of any mainline Katamari game. Many of the post-Takahashi games seem like they thrive off of being a player's first exposure to the series. It's easier to excuse the shoddy design and reused content when tactical ball-rolling action is just being introduced to you. But by 2011, I think everyone had gotten the memo of what Katamari was about. I'd even say it was a bit overplayed. And so, with the passing of Touch My Katamari's release, the series' relevance faded away. From 2012 onwards, the only Katamari games released were small mobile games with few significant connections to previous titles. These installments were a derivative of other mobile games of the time, only invoking the Katamari name to stand out in a sea of App Store shovelware. There was a Tap My Katamari. It's like a cookie clicker thing, but with Katamari. Amazing Katamari Damacy is cut from the forever iconic Subway Surfers / Sonic Dash / Minion Rush / 6ix9ine Runner genre. I guess a Katamari endless runner where you're constantly pushing forward rolling up new objects isn't too bad of a concept, but it shines a light on how creatively bankrupt this series had become. These weren't the first trashy mobile titles Namco put out, but it was the first gap of time where that output became the crux of the Katamari IP. Tap My Katamari would be delisted a little over a year after its release, with Amazing lasting a more significant 4. This shit wasn't meant to last, it was meant to squeeze money out of the fans waiting for a return to form. One of the most interesting developments to come out of this time period, though, pertained to the art style change in Amazing Katamari. The softer, flat designs from 2011 were fully embraced as the new look of the games, stepping away from the sharp edges inherited from the PlayStation 2 era. This subtle style shift over 6 years might not seem entirely significant at first, other than interestingly aligning the art closer to that of Takahashi's post-Katamari projects, but in late 2018, it would be clear that the change was leading up to something big. Katamari Damacy re-rolled into existence in December 2018, breaking the 7-year streak of no console or handheld releases in the series. It wasn't a new installment or anything, just a remaster of the original PS2 game for modern hardware, but at this point, you're gonna take what you can get. The drop did well to make this release exciting to fans. Enough time had passed since Katamari had last been relevant that the release was clouded in nostalgia. People, including I, were pumped to see the IP back on Namco's radar. From my understanding, Reroll was part of this ongoing initiative to put out low-cost ports of Namco's weirder back catalog, united under the Encore series umbrella in Japan. As a port of the first Katamari game, this is pretty much as basic as you can get. Outside of the altered art style, increased resolution, and a couple nearly unnoticeable gameplay differences, this is a one-to-one port of the PlayStation 2 classic Katamari Damacy. There are no playable cousins, no point system, no jumping, no Katamari drive, no morphing, no anything. It's back to basics, baby. Katamari in its most rudimentary form. There are a few nitpicks I can make with this authenticity to the original game. I think the HUD and menus look cheaper than the original. The shadows on small objects look ugly as sin, even if it's an easy detail to miss. I also noticed a couple of missing sound effects and others that sounded way lower quality than the original. But all of this is nothing. As a way to play the first Katamari, Reroll does the job perfectly fine, and is a fantastic conversion for modern hardware. You might be asking why I'm even bothering to talk about this port if I've already covered its origin. I don't know, I just think it's an interesting end cap to the series. Everything in Katamari expanded and rolled into this gargantuan thing, not becoming unrecognizable from its source material, but still incredibly different. And then it loops back around to the freshest, most talked about entry being where it all started. Most of my friends who I talk about Katamari with don't even realize there were games other than this one. Those who do have next to no knowledge of what sets it apart from its sequels. The first Katamari Damacy is a slower paced game, rather than its arcadey time trial sequels. It leans harder into the mechanics inherent to it, with you constantly bumping into walls and losing huge chunks of your items. The controls can be sluggish and somewhat unresponsive coming off of the later game setups. Rather than pure memorization of item batches to progress past arbitrary roadblocks, you've got to become familiar with the layout of the city you're rolling itself. The writing in the first Katamari is so much simpler than later on. It doesn't need to be super clever and witty and do all this funny shit. The text just exists to add flavor to what's already there. I have a massive appreciation for what We Love Katamari did for the world, and I think later installments, especially Touch My Katamari, do well to work within the canon set down there. But I get the vibe that the script and aesthetics originally were meant to complement the gameplay rather than be the soul of the project itself. As I said before, everything has weight in this game. Every island, every building, every person, every object is logged into your collection as breathing parts of the world you're rolling. The goofy XD randomness of it all is offset by a massive dose of sincerity. For the real world, not the Katamari world. For something so abstract, it feels more human than most games could ever hope to achieve. That concoction of gooey sentimentality, aesthetic originality, and innovative game design is the reason why Katamari is forever. No 7-year mobile phone hell era can kill what rolls up death itself. I think in the success of Katamari Damacy Reroll and how well that port holds up today, you can start to see where the sequels went wrong as follow-ups. Analyzing everything I've talked about so far, I think I've distilled 3 reasons we can look to as for the direction the series took. Obviously, these are speculative, so feel free to disagree and leave a comment telling me to delete this video if you think I'm talking out of my ass. The first reason is obviously the departure of Kaita Takahashi from the Katamari series. Video games are group efforts, and it would be very ignorant of me to act as if Takahashi was the sole person pushing the series forward. But in my research, it was clear that the first 2 games were very much born of his ideas about video games and art. With his departure, the cracks in Katamari started to show as the aesthetics and gameplay direction started to feel less and less cohesive. It wasn't that these aspects always dropped off in quality, but they didn't seem unified under one complete vision. Take Touch My Katamari for example. The work done for the art and music is incredible and very cohesive, but unfortunately it's the backdrop for mind-numbing gameplay. There are interesting mechanics put out here used in levels not designed around them in the slightest. Compare this to the first 2 games that are perfectly balanced in pretty much every facet they could be. This second reason might seem kinda weird, but hear me out on it. I think that We Love Katamari being such a different sequel from its predecessor threw off the people tasked with continuing the series following it. We Love and its predecessor have contradictory structure, as I explained earlier. The first game was made up of mostly size goals that built up one after the other, creating this short but sweet linear experience with a set end. Its follow-up abandons that for a showcase of disconnected gimmick-based stages, set up to be replayed for better times or higher scores over and over again. Beginning with me and My Katamari, you can sense a disconnect of these two different directions, with the weird gimmick stages haphazardly strewn across samey size goals. It seems to me that rather than committing to evolving what the first game set down, or fully going with the We Love Katamari blueprint, an attempt was made to weave everything together at the cost of innovation. The third and final reason is to me the largest and encompasses all of the factors I've been talking about so far. Undervaluing the game design of Katamari and focusing too much energy into anything and everything else. A common factor between all of the follow-ups to We Love are their boring-ass levels. There are some gems scattered here and there. I usually had something positive to say when the games experimented with new gimmick stages, but the vast majority of what I was playing was very uninspired and incredibly derivative. At some point, it feels like Katamari became too invested in its own brand and felt the need to divert its attention into quirky new dialogue or fancy new graphics, rather than fun new stages. Because it was like, it's Katamari! It's easy to understand and fun for everyone. It's not like the levels have to be designed or anything, just throw some shit down and call it a day. For God's sake, Forever was literally comprised of entirely reused stages. Katamari is a series that started out with love and admiration for the real world, and then became a series with love and admiration for itself. It's the difference between the melody of animal sounds and the grand orchestral cover of the same track 3 games later. I think that's a sympathetic plight. These sequels are really fun experiences in their own right. I love Katamari too, and it's hard not to look past the fact that the level is reused when the level is just so damn fun. But the brass tacks of it is, Katamari isn't fun inherently. It's fun because it was a game made by passionate people who put their all into it. The largest thing that set it apart from everything else wasn't its weird gameplay or funky graphics or fantastic music. It was that it felt so intimate, like playing an indie game made by a couple of people just making the kind of game that they wanted to play. Take that away and man, you've just got another Namco franchise on your hands. So, what's out there on the horizon for our ball-rolling hero? Will we ever see another Katamari game? I don't know, dude. Do I look like I made Tekken? The series has ingrained itself into the gaming ethos enough that I think a true new installment is inevitable. The new generation of video game consoles with their SSDs and crazy graphical fidelity could probably run an insane tricked-out Katamari installment if Namco was willing to cough up the change for it. There's enough brand recognition that I think people would be willing to play it for that alone. I just think the biggest hurdle is figuring out the problems that the previous sequel suffered from. If it were me, I say, with no proper game development experience, I'd lean into the formula set down in We Love Katamari and go for a more non-linear showcase of different ideas. With Reroll out there, people have the fundamentals fresh in their mind. Set them up and knock them down with some really crazy shit. Also, bring back Katamari Drive. It was really fun. Alternatively, if Namco doesn't want to greenlight my AAA Katamari Damacy concept, releasing a remake of We Love Katamari a la Damacy Reroll would be a logical next step after the first re-release. It's less accessible than the first game and criminally overshadowed by it, so giving us a budget way to experience it again with all the added benefits of Reroll would be fantastic. Oh, wait, while I was taking 1 year to finish a new video, Namco trademarked We Love Katamari Reroll. Oh, wait, while I was taking 3 months to finish editing this video, Namco revealed We Love Katamari Reroll. In a Nintendo Direct, nonetheless. Did you guys see that new Pikmin 4 trailer? It's gonna be so good, dude. I'm sorry to talk about this as a small footnote at the end of the video, but from the trailer it looks fantastic, and beyond what I ever expected of this remake. The new content looks very promising and could lay down the groundwork for a new installment. I'm also glad to see new quality of life features added. Hopefully we'll see the return of Katamari Drive in this also. If I had to complain about anything, I think this shot of the king is a little unnecessary. Yeah, I know there's nothing inherently wrong with it, but if you've made it this far into the video, maybe consider picking it up when it launches in June if you haven't played it already. Or if you have already also, I guess. Maybe more sales will incentivize them to do more with the IP or something. I'm not sure if that ever actually worked. If there's one thing that's for certain, though, it's that one simple fact that will always ring true. Through wind and storm, through fire and rain, always and always, Katamari Damacy is really awesome. Oh, yeah, and while I'm here, I'm sorry about that taking 1 year to finish a video thing. That was, like, my bad. If you were following my social media and wondering what happened to that Moon Remix RPG Adventure video, it's still in production. I'm just taking more time to perfect it. If you were excited for it and haven't seen already, a cut of the first half of it is linked unlisted on my Twitter page. I'll also link it in the description here if you're someone who enjoyed this video and maybe wants to see more. I can say right now to not expect the final version to be my next upload, but I'm confident you'll see it someday. But, until then, I'm Zinbuster, the biggest Karikano fan in the world, and I will gladly fight anyone who challenges that title. Hopefully things will smooth out and 2023 will have more videos like this on the docket. I'm still working hard, and to everyone who was waiting for the next upload, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Peace out, and I'll see you next time.